Hi Year 11, this video is on English Language Paper 1 reading section. Now what you will need for this video is some paper and a pen, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to work through a paper 1. Now at this stage in your revision, your English language revision should look like lots of practice. Now that doesn't mean you have to do this whole paper in one go. You might want to kind of do one question at a time, pause the video, remind yourself where you're up to and come back to it. But I would say that just sitting and listening to this video won't be that helpful. So make sure you've got your pen with you and you're ready to work through a paper. Remember, for English language paper 1, it's your narrative. So by the time you come to the reading section, you will have done your narrative, because remember, you always start with your question 5. Now, a lot of the revision for English language comes down to practice. The more you practice, the more confident you will be for each question, and the quicker you will be at answering them in the timed conditions. Now, one of the biggest challenges for the grade 7s, 8s and 9s is getting it done to a high quality in a relatively short amount of time. So you really do need to be keeping your eye on the clock. Now I've put together this little clock for you just to kind of draw your attention to the time it takes to answer each question. Now this is an hour, obviously, and that's presuming that your narrative takes you around 45 minutes. Now some of you might be slightly less than that. You shouldn't be any more than that for your narrative, especially considering you have practiced and you've practiced applying it to lots of different questions. Now before I start, I would like to draw your attention to this. Now this reading section tests your reading, obviously. So if you rush the reading, you are very, very likely to make mistakes. Now, you are all good readers. You read well and you're competent and you understand what you've read. But in an exam, that becomes more challenging. You're under pressure. It's unfamiliar. You've done your narrative. You're desperate to get started. Now, I have actually set aside 7 minutes for active reading. And I'm going to show you in a minute what I mean by that. It's not just sitting there reading it over, getting the gist, and then trying to answer your GCSE reading questions after just having a skim over. So 7 minutes for active reading. Then you've got 25 minutes for question 4. Now that is a 20-mark question, and it is really important that you do them in this order. We are going to practice them in this order today, but we have taught you this order specifically so that you can get as many marks as possible. Then we've got 15 minutes for question 2, 10 for question 3, and then there's 5 minutes there for question 1. It's very unlikely to take you 5 minutes, but if we keep that there as a 5-minute slot, once you've done your question 1, you might go back and just add some extra comments to your question 3 or your question 2. Now the key is that you practice this before the exam. Obviously, you don't want to be sat there in a PPE or a real exam thinking, oh, how long was it that we're supposed to spend on 2? Oh no, I've spent this long, because it will send you into a bit of a spin. You are looking to be confident and assured on this question, and part of that is taking ownership of the time. You will be able to see a clock. If you can't, put your hand up and ask, because you're entitled to see a clock, and you should be really keeping track on how long it takes you for each question. Equally with your revision, you don't want to be practicing question 4s and taking an hour on them, because that isn't realistic. I would suggest that anything you do and anything you bring to your teacher to have a look at, because I know a lot of you are doing that, should really be something that you have taken a realistic amount of time on. So I'm going to talk to you about active reading now, and in a minute you're going to pause this video. There's this slide and the next slide, and I want you to make sure that you've read the text. You might have seen this text before, that's okay if you have. I want to make sure that you've read the text but you fully understand it. Now one of the things I really want you to draw your attention to is this bit in the box. Now it's so easy to miss this out on an exam because you want to get straight to the extract, and this isn't the extract. But this gives you some context that will really add to your understanding, because you're not very likely to have read the text or that the extract's from, so you won't really know where they're on a journey, where they're going to. If there's two characters together, what are their relationships? So you can see here, we find out that it's the early 1900s, so that gives you a bit of context. He's starting a journey from London and he's going to a funeral. Straight away I'm like, okay, I get that. I know a little bit about the 1900s. I understand that they're on a journey and I know where they're going to. And it really will just enhance your understanding. Now, when I talk to you about active reading, that means that you shouldn't read a text without a pen or a highlighter in your hand. And you shouldn't leave a text unmarked. I want to be seen, and I'm seeing this more and more often on the more successful candidates, that you are really engaging with that text. And I would say after every single paragraph, you want to summarise it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to write a full summary next to the text, but you should be able to go, okay, that paragraph, I can say the key points. I always say to my class, imagine that there's like a younger child next to you and you're just quickly explaining to them in quite simple terms what's happening. I'm not going to read this extract to you. I'm going to stop the video, but I will just model how to actively read the first paragraph. So, you're reading, you want to say, oh, it's Monday, November, it's dark, it's foggy, there's hardly any daylight there. I've got it. I understand what that is about. Now, it's so simple, but I've picked up, I fully know. If someone said to me, what month is it? November. What day is it? And it sounds really obvious when you're not in an exam, but so often I will say, you know, off you go, guys, read the extract. And then I'll say to someone, what day was it? And they're going, oh, and they're having to read back through the text. That is going to hold you back. So you've got this page and another page. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, give yourself 7 minutes, time it, and read, actively read the extract, please. Okay, question 4. So 20 marks, the biggest mark language question you'll do out of both papers. So it's really worth your time practicing this to make sure that you get it right. Now, sometimes they tell you, you know, use specific lines like they have here. Really, really tune into that, because if you comment on anything that's outside of the lines, you get no marks for that, which is harsh, but it is the reality. So just make sure you don't get marked down on anything like that. Now, you always get a statement that a student has said about the text. So you've got here, this part of the story shows how the narrator Arthur Kipps was not worried about future events and was in fact looking forward to it. So you can see there that I have highlighted the two parts of the statement. Now, that is important. It's not just because I want you to colour in the statement. It's because probably when I'm answering this question, I will look back at this statement probably 5, 6, 7 times, because this statement is the whole thing that drives your answer. Now, the question they are actually asking you is, to what extent do you agree? And you can agree or you can disagree. That is up to you. Really give it some time and think whether you want to fully agree or disagree. What I would say is, though, make sure you don't fall into the trap of trying to do an equal statement or an equal argument. You're being tested on your skill of evaluation, and evaluating is saying how effective you think something is. So maybe imagine that your friends give you the narrative and they want you to have a little look over it and see, do you think I've really shown this? Now, again, I would like you to pause this video and try and find some evidence. Now, ideally you want 4 paragraphs for this. Some evidence to show that he wasn't worried about future events, and some to show that he was looking forward to it. So have a go at that independently, pause the video, and we'll discuss it in a minute. So here we've got the extract that we're looking at, and the statement, I have deliberately been and copied it again to the top, just because I really want you to remember that you are supposed to be focusing. Now, you are looking for evidence. Let's say you're going to agree with this. So we're looking for evidence to show First of all, that he wasn't worried. So you might start to look at the fact that he felt no uneasiness, no apprehension. He blamed any sort of depression of his spirits on the fog, and every citizen of London felt like that. He felt nothing other than curiosity, and he felt a mild sense of adventure. Now, I would say this mild sense of adventure shows that he was looking forward to it. You might say he's got a bit of a relief at getting away from the unhealthy atmosphere of fog and dankness, which means like miserable. He was young, he was 23, and he had a schoolboy's passion for railway stations, so he was enjoying it. And you might look here about how he sort of rejects that sense of foreboding. He says that he didn't really feel that. It would have been easy to look back and think, oh, I felt terrible, but he didn't. Now you will look there that we've got quite scattered quotation there, and that is absolutely fine. For the top grades, you want to be able to scatter your quotation, and I know your teacher will have spoken to you about that, but you might want to say, for example, you know, he felt no uneasiness or apprehension, and explore that and say this is reinforced by the fact that he blames his feelings, any feelings of depression, on the fog, and he believes that every citizen of London felt like this, which shows, and then explore it like that. So you don't just need 4 sort of random isolated quotes. I would suggest that your level, you want to be kind of scattering quotations out and embedding them, short clipped quotations. Now these are the evaluative sentence stems that you have been taught. So you always want to use the statement to drive your answer. And then you lead in with your method. So through the clever use of, now the thing you don't want to do is say through the clever use of and then put the quote in. That is a real common error. So you might say through the clever use of description, through the clever use of vivid imagery, through the clever use of a metaphor. Now if you're really stuck, say through the clever use of the phrase. What you don't want to say is through the clever use of and then just force your quote in there, because that isn't right. Now in a minute I'm going to show you an example of a student who's followed the writing frame and scattered the quotations well. So here's a first paragraph of a student who responded to this. So they start with the statement of agreement. Don't forget that, because it really does send that direction for your answer. And remember, you only have to do that once. You don't need to start every paragraph with I agree, I agree. Now what this student has done well is really kept that focus on the character not being worried. So we're forced to see that the character was not worried about the journey. So really using that statement to drive their answer through the clever use, there it is, the evaluation of the flashback. So remember, for this question you can use language and structure. So quite clearly here we've got an understanding of method, and we are focusing on that statement where he reflects on his feelings that day. Indeed, he says that he felt no uneasiness or apprehension whatsoever. A really nice embedded quote. They've just weaved it in. Remember, you always want to avoid saying through the quote or I know this because. It just sounds quite clumsy. Which shows that when reflecting on his journey, he will clearly recall not feeling worried. There's the statement again. Indeed, they've missed a comma there. The adverb whatsoever almost reinforces how he did not feel even slightly worried, there's the word again, and encourages the reader to focus on this lack of concern. Now this student really nicely has shown a really strong understanding of subject terminology, but I would say if you couldn't figure out what type of word whatsoever was, but you still wanted to focus on how it really highlights his lack of concern, write the word whatsoever. Now you can't do this every time because it's obvious that you haven't revised any subject terminology, but we're looking for methods and words and methods. So I would say never be held back on commenting on something because you don't know what word class it is. It's always better the marks are in the comments. So, indeed, he blamed any depression, just a little short quote there, of his mood on the fog, which reinforces the idea that he did not feel worried, yet perhaps encourages a slightly sinister tone. The pathetic fallacy, another method here, could symbolise that his vision for the future was perhaps clouded and perhaps foreshadow an underlying danger to come. So you can see that scattered quote there. They want to talk about the fog, a little weaved in idea of depression of his mood. Now, weaving in quotes like that is really clever. And this idea, you know, his vision from the future was perhaps clouded. That's quite a symbolic understanding of fog, that maybe he didn't see what was to come. Now, you'll also notice what this student does well is words like, actually they've done it a lot, perhaps, 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 almost. That is called tentative analysis. And remember, we don't know what the writer intended. It's quite a simplistic way to think of it, but we don't know. So using that tentative perhaps, might, almost is a really good method. So I would say now, stop the video, go back and have a go at your question 4. Now, if you bring that into school, I will happily mark that for you, or if you put it on the Year 11 Google Classroom page, I will happily give you a little bit of feedback on this. Okay, well done. By this point, you should have completed a question 4. And a reminder that sitting and listening to this video, letting it run along in the background while you do something else, isn't going to be that useful at this point. The whole purpose of this video is that you are actively practicing. So this is question 2 now, 8 marks, and this is something that actually as a year group you're really good at. It's something that we've been practicing with you since you were in Year 7, language analysis. So you're looking at how the writer uses language to describe the fog. Just make sure that you get the focus of the question. Similarly to what we just did with the last one, make sure you answer the questions. It sounds really obvious, but so often clever students will go, oh, London, and then accidentally start to comment on London or something different. So just make sure you're looking at the fog. Now I'm going to ask you to pause this video and highlight quotations, any patterns that you see, jump on, how is the fog described, and then I'll come back to it in a minute. So pause the video here, please. Okay, well done. I had a go at that while you were doing it, and this is what I have picked out. So just have a little look, see how we compare. Now, excuse me, similarly to the question 4, you want to be thinking about how you can showcase your skill as a reader. And that certainly isn't by copying out big, long chunks. Now, I always say, look for patterns if you can. So, if you see a colour, say, oh, are there any other colours? Do they contrast with that? Or do they link to that? Because we've done lots of inferences around colours and things that they could suggest. Also, if you see verbs, for example, are there any other verbs, and what does that suggest about the thing and the way it moves? And if it had a personality, what would the personality be like? I know that sounds a bit strange, but that's the way I would think about that. Now, if this fog was a person or an animal, what would it be like? Now, a lot of the times you'll see things that kind of link to something being animalistic, and that kind of maybe sometimes a predator or a prey image. I would say that's there quite often. So these are the things that I picked out. Now, what you want to be able to do is say 3 clear things about the fog. So you might say here that the fog is a bullying force, the fog is intimidating, it's invasive, it's inescapable. But you want to make sure you've got 3 things to really say about the fog, because otherwise you'll end up saying the fog hemmed them in. And then you're using the quote to answer the question. So remember, you make your point first. So I've got lots of ideas here. The fact that it hemmed them in on all sides, I thought suggests that the fog was almost trapping them. It was bullying them. It was powerful. It didn't allow any daylight to penetrate the gloom. So I thought that idea of the fog almost like keeping them in darkness, being an intimidating, bullying force. I think the idea of it you know, not letting daylight through as well. We look at, you know, the symbolisms of daylight and how light can often symbolize hope. So it's like, oh, I've got that inference there. So maybe this fog is keeping the hope out of London and keeping them in darkness. Also, I picked out a lot of verbs here: hanging, creeping, swirling, seething, choked, blinded, sneered, and stained. And I would say that there's a semantic field of kind of force and violence here. So what does that suggest about the fog? I also picked this out because it's a simile, like sour breath. If you're thinking of that idea of it being kind of intimidating and disgusting, there's lots for you to say, even the idea that the fog is sly. Now, when you first look at this extract, you will see the most obvious quotes. Of course you will. You're in an exam, you're under pressure. Now, what I want to remind you of is that this exam is not tiered. So there are things in this extract for students who are working, you know, at the grade 4, the grade 5, the grade 7, and the grade 9. So you really need to spend your time thinking, what am I going to say about this fog? What might this fog symbolise? If it was a person or an animal, what would the characteristics be? Because you don't just want to say the fog is sinister because it is gloomy. The fog is mysterious because it is swirling. Now, they are not wrong, but you aren't showcasing the skill of reading. So just have a little look, compare your quotes to mine, have a bit of a think about what the 3 things you would say about the fog, and then I'm going to show you an example. Okay, so I've got the first paragraph of a student's answer here. Now, the key thing I think this student has done, this is only one paragraph, remember there will be 3, is not messed about with words. Now, all too often, I think students who are looking for a grade 7 and above try to be a little bit fancy and say, you know, the writer has used a plethora of different language devices that really make us see that the fog is foggy. And before you know it, it's like, oh my goodness, where are you going with this? Now, of course, you do need to show off wherever possible, but the way you will show off is by the precision in which you identify your point and the accuracy with which you pull out quotation, and also the sophistication of your inference. So straight away here, the fog is described as invasive. That's nice, a clear point about the fog, as it is hanging over the river, a nice embedded quote. This shows that the fog is looming over London, there's a point, and could suggest a feeling that it is waiting to fall. This could symbolise a sense of impending doom brought on the fog, almost as if there's no escape in it that links to it being invasive. Indeed, this is reinforced by the negative verbs used to describe the fog, such as swirling, seething, and creeping, which all give us a sense that the fog is almost plotting a way to invade, back to the point, London. Indeed, the personification of the fog creeping almost makes it sound like a criminal who's waiting to gain entry, eager to go unseen. Now you can see the skill there picking out that collection of verbs and how this student has managed to sort of gather together some inferences. Now that idea about it being a criminal, that's quite original. They've thought, what does creeping make me think of? And they've got to the idea of it being a criminal. Nice, because yeah, invasive, that's what criminals do. That is the way to succeeding, really, is really thinking about quotations and what they might suggest. Now, your teacher might have shown you this idea of thinking outside the box, and sometimes it's easy to say, oh, think outside the box, but what does that really mean? Now, you might have learned this idea of shows, suggests, and symbolises, but it really doesn't matter if you use these 3 words. The purpose of this visual is to help you move away from the literal to the metaphorical. So you might say shows, shows, or you might use any evaluative statement, but really what you are doing is thinking, what does that colour make me think of? Is there a connection to it? Does it remind me of an animal or a symbol or anything like that? And I would say if you think of something, write it down, because in English you never lose marks, you only gain. And it might just be that you come up with an idea that an examiner says, oh, that's the first thing I've read like that. No one's linked creeping to a criminal. Excellent, they're moving into perceptive. Okay, so finally we're going to have a look at question 3, which is the structure question, and it's 8 marks. Now you will be doing 3 or 1 last, so by this point in the exam you're going to be tired. You might be running out of time. You've got to think when you're practicing, how am I going to make sure that I go into that structure question assured and knowing what I am doing. Now a key mistake that people make is by commenting on language. Now this, we dread it. Examiners dread it. You are asked about the structure of the text, not the language in it. So if you find yourself writing the use of the adjective, the use of the noun, you've gone off track. Pull yourself back. Don't do it. So these are the only structural devices that you will need. Yeah, and think about this picture here, the narrative arc. What is the journey of the text? Where does the tension rise? Where's the most exciting part? Where does it fall? Does it fall? It might not. And how does it end? So I'm going to ask you, you all know these, you've done them in class. I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and just make yourself some notes so you know these structural devices and you've got them ready to go. Now what you're looking at is the journey of a text, and I would really keep this visual in mind, particularly this. How does it start and how does it end? Does the mood change? Now mood, tone, tension rises, tension falls will massively help you for this question. Remember, you do use quotations, but you only use quotations to show what we are focusing on at that moment. Think about it as a journey. Now your teacher will have taught you a writing frame like this, and that is so you can answer the question in as short a time as possible and get as many marks as possible. So if this isn't the exact writing frame your teacher's told you, get your English book out, check your writing frame. But I would like you to please now have a go at writing a response on the structure of this text, and then I'm going to show you an example of a good paragraph 1 and lead it into a paragraph 2. So have a go at this now, please. Okay, this is just the start of an answer, but you can see what the students done well is that they've used the sentence structures, because these sentence structures are there to save you time and to make sure that you're not sat in an exam with sort of 12 minutes left thinking, oh no, you know, I know how it starts, I know how it ends, but I don't know how to get my ideas onto paper. So you can see in the exposition we're forced to focus on the setting and the fact that it was an afternoon in November and dark. That's it. The quotes are there to show what we focus on, but we aren't going to go, oh, the use of November suggests. This establishes, now that's a nice word to use in your opening paragraph because it shows that you're aware that the writer is setting us up, making us feel something. A rather sinister tone, that's a nice comment on tone, and creates an eerie mood, encouraging the reader to feel a sense of impending doom as the character embarks on his journey. So a sense of understanding, we've got that feeling that something bad is going to happen. The focus then shifts, a nice taut sentence, to the fog that was hanging over the river. This increases the tension from the opening paragraph as the reader starts to realise that the fog is, and they would carry on like that. Now the thing that's good about this answer is the short clipped quotation and that increases the tension. So you want what they establish at the start. Does the tension rise? Does it fall? Think about this as a journey. Okay, now I would suggest that if you have done this paper, you might have done this over a couple of nights, get your teacher's eyes on it so they can give you a little bit of feedback on the practice that you've done. But I can't stress enough how your revision at this stage should be little short bursts of practice, not just revising sentence structures. That's what year 10 was for. We taught you all the sentence structures in year 10. This is about really crafting your responses and making sure you know confidently how to approach the question so you can get that grade 7, 8 or 9.